In the fat adapted state, you've got this foundation, this enhanced foundation of metabolism that's providing energy to the body, right? So the more your fat system is burning energy, burning oxygen to provide ATP as energy, the less it's relying on carbohydrate as a fuel substrate.
Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Each week, renowned sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Larson, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Mariana Rakai, and coach and cyclist Paul Worlowski discuss training, racing, and improving your health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. Today we have listener questions, and my friend Dan Neff has been listening to our podcast on the way home from cyclocross races, and he keeps asking us about this fat adaptation and working with our nutrition. So here's his new question. He's been refining his thinking. So with our short kind of races like cyclocross, crits, or mountain bike races, road races, is there a benefit to being fat adapted versus being carb adapted being carb adapted for the endurance things like Ironman or 24-hour racing or 100-mile gravel events? And then we go on to ask, what does it mean to be metabolically flexible, and how does it apply to consuming fats and carbs as a fuel source? That's a lot in the question. So let's start with that first part about short events versus long events.
Yep. It's a super question. This is debatable out there, and it probably depends on what camp you kind of hang out in. But, there's this classic science-y paper written by colleagues of mine, Tim Noakes, Jeff Volek, and it's basically brings out the global holistic benefit of being fat adapted. So in the fat adapted state, the whole, you're basically anchoring, you've got this foundation, this enhanced foundation of metabolism that's providing energy to the body, right? So the more your fat system is burning energy, burning oxygen to provide ATP as energy, the less it's relying on carbohydrate as a fuel substrate, as one example. So even in the crit or spiky situation, it's nice if a good proportion of your energy needs are already being met by fat. And so, I had Swain Tuft, who's I know Paul knows, but he's a famous cyclist, friend of mine, famous cyclist. Multi-Tour de France wins, Giro pink jersey wearer, et cetera, right? So it's like, he told me when I was interviewing him, it's like road cycling in any form is about how can you reserve yourself for the high intensity bouts, and fat adaptation is one way that you can protect those resources. So he learned that, and Swain adapted his diet. He was one of the earlier adopters, kind of doing that when everyone else was doing it. And it was many of his. It wasn't that a lot. He didn't get a lot of wins before that. He was already an immense talent, and training goes a long way to providing that foundation that we're talking about. The nutrition was one extra lever that Swain learned to pull, especially as he became more of an aging athlete. That's so. I think that's that. And there's a whole bunch of other advantages as well. There's enhanced recovery. There's more of the ketones that are around in your body, right? And the ketones, remember, we've learned on former podcasts that this is the macronutrient that is made by your liver when carbohydrates are kind of lower, when your insulin is low, and your glucose is low. It forces the liver to turn those fats and amino acids via the process of gluconeogenesis into glucose and ketones. to supply that for the rest of the body. So the more you can rely on your fat stores, which are unlimited in all of us for argument's sake, the more it just provides an overall foundation of recovery and energy needs, sustained energy during the day and in your activity, to save yourself for those important all-out spikes that you want.
What about then, like, all out efforts? People often say if you're in ketosis or low carb, those high spikes of power are blunted.
There's a total other camp. If we're talking like, you're an anaerobe totally, um, I think that the jury is probably still out on that. And there's, especially in the young athlete context, those, they can burn a lot of sugar. I was one of them a long time ago, and I could do the same thing. And yeah, for that context, it's probably just fine. We're still learning in this area, and again, we have to all acknowledge that we don't know everything. Tim Noakes and others are working on a construct where really the only thing that matters in these sprints are a balanced level of blood glucose, and the whole metabolism aspect is somewhat, we don't really know how much energy, sugar burning energy, anaerobic energy, is absolutely necessary. And if we look to another scientist that contributes to HIIT science, Peter Weyand, he's the godfather ultimately of the anaerobic speed and power reserve. We've gone through on another podcast before, and he says, look, there's no evidence really that anaerobic metabolism is necessarily fueling some of these very short all-out efforts. It's an amazing transfer of energy. We're not saying that those aren't actually occurring and those processes don't happen in the body. We're just saying that you don't necessarily have to have like sugar as the energy metabolism present, and especially external sugar, exogenous levels, right? You don't have to consume sugar necessarily for that to happen. Remember that we've got a whole bunch of sugar that's stored in the form of glycogen, and liver glycogen is just sitting in there, muscle and liver glycogen, ready to go. And that's all been put in us as we all slept last night, right? All of the food that you ate last night for dinner, in any form, it could have been totally protein and fat based, it all still would have converted over to carbohydrate through the process of gluconeogenesis. That's how we're built. So that's all sitting within you. You don't necessarily have to go and douse a whole bunch of sugar on the flame to make it go. There's the evidence is slim on that one.
So this might come as a shocker then, that you don't have to eat your gels before your 5K race.
No, you don't. No, you don't have to. I mean, don't forget. Think about what we know. All the studies from Asker Jukendrup and others about the mouth rinsing studies. There's no question there's a response there, but it might not be from a sugar burning standpoint. It's more of a central nervous system stimulant, right? Sugar itself, we know it's like a central nervous system stimulant. So the mouth rinse studies showed that. So just to elaborate. Subjects just took in a mouth rinse of sugar and they spat it out. So no possible metabolism of that sugar could take place. But just the act of actually brushing the palate with sugar was enough to stimulate the brain to say, oh, we must have sugar coming into the system and that we're going to be great. And the performance was enhanced just with that process, proving that it is a central nervous system regulator in terms of that response that you're getting. So sure, if use a gel, if it gives you that, pop and that helps, that's valid and we'll take that. But just know it's probably not from a metabolic sort of standpoint. It's more from it's stimulating your CNS. But if you want to think sort of more Google Earth or broadly, get your whole system just healthy, right? This is why we're always promoting being a healthy athlete. Make sure that diet is just like, is solid and bulletproof. And then that should support, if it's whole food in general, that should support a strong foundation of aerobic metabolism, that we can build off of, so that our those back to Paul's initial question of Dan, that so his big spikes and surges can be as strong as possible, but he's going to mostly get that from his training, being familiar with doing those spikes, probably a little bit of gym work as well, right? To really, so you can maximally recruit during those efforts. And then having the solid, healthy foundation to recover from all those efforts. Those are going to be the big rocks. It's not throwing any sort of gasoline on the engine. That might be a top up. It's probably coming from a central nervous system stim.
I don't want to move on yet, because I hear and I read questions about low carb nutrition for athletes, especially like Olympic distance or like half marathon compared to marathon or Ironman distance. And I assume the answer is the same, because if we're talking about like 2-hour race, 3-hour race, we don't need to fuel up that much compared to long distance, right? Like we have everything we need on board already. But a lot of athletes are fueling with gels and sport strings during those shorter events that last about 2-3 hours.
Yeah, for sure. And those are, in those ones there is a contribution of that I should backtrack a little bit now. So we're moving away from the spikiness now, and now we're moving in more to the 2 to 3 hour range. Now we're kind of, that's what we're talking. So now we do know from tracer studies, right? This is when like they do carbon dating with the tracers, and they actually can see how much of the carbon molecules of the carbohydrate are actually being metabolized when we actually do that exercise, right? And they're showing, I believe, that about 75% of that can be oxidized. Okay, so yes, we can get a contribution to those additional carbohydrates. Some of it, not all of it, but some, a good chunk of it actually gets metabolized. Some of it just stays in the bloodstream. And yeah, that could make a small contribution to the performance in those events. And look, there are many athletes, successful athletes, that swear by the Morton gels and all these various different things, right? Like, and I think the jury's kind of still out on those. But if that's working for you, I think that's great. We know it works well in the younger context. So if you're a an early teen or a late teen, or an early 20s to maybe even early 30s athlete, that might work really, really well for you. Something happens as we grow older where our ability to process that sugar, so what it is, goes down. It just doesn't seem to work kind of as efficiently. So that's when you might want to sort of consider more of the fat adaptation context, and of course, I would say even earlier too. It's probably a good practice. I think there's not a lot of evidence to me that fat can't do a lot of the same work that any of that sugar or carbohydrate is doing in those other studies. I think we know we can get fat metabolism rates up to 2 grams a minute, right? So this is guys like Dan Plews setting the world record for the Ironman in the age group, going under 8 hours, or winning the Kona 1. We know his fat adaptation rates are, he's managed to build those to ridiculous levels. And I know he certainly does not need these gels to go as fast as he does. So as one example. And
but for everyday athletes that have not been working with their fat adaptation and they are taking the gels, it might take a while before they can actually access those
fat stores.
Fat stores.
That's right. We do need to. Good point, Mariana. We need to go through a period of adaptation, and that can be a very frustrating time for people, especially if like me, And you, Mariana, I know, like we were sort of down the road of being more carb adapted or sugar adapted. And we were very used to having that regular drip of glucose in our life to keep our glucose levels up to make us feel happy and energized. And you kind of have to go through that sad period where, dopamine levels aren't as spiked all the time, right? You remember it wasn't too long ago for you. And yeah, like those are you kind of you need to go through those periods of time to and then make yourself believe that you can actually go for these longer periods of time without always dousing with a gel or whatever
Mm-hmm.
you take.
Mm-hmm. I think it was an exciting period. I think it was an exciting journey because you need to connect with the mind too. Like you have those doubts and questions, but I think it was exciting to see results without lots of sugar.
So what does it mean when the term is used metabolically flexible? What does that mean?
Yeah, super question. What it means is you can access either fats or carbohydrates. So if you're generally able to go without if you have to. So this is like a perfect little survival sort of adaptation that you have. Like, so say if you're in the military, you want to be metabolically flexible because you never know when you're going to have to go without. Maybe you don't have a ration on your person and you have to go and perform, something really important that's going to be life-saving for you or others. So you need to be metabolically flexible in that. Same for the athlete. You're metabolically flexible. You don't have to rely on that sugar. But all of a sudden you do have that available to you. You can also burn that carbohydrate. So if you're doing a race like an Ironman, like Mariana's doing, even though she's mostly fat adapted, she can still take on the gels on that course. Take on Coke. She switched to Coke. Midway through the bike because that's what she knew she needed, and she could use both fuels. So it kind of like it doesn't work the other way. It doesn't work where if you're carb adapted, you can't switch over quickly to the fat. But if you're fat adapted, you usually can switch back to the carbohydrate. So I think that's what it means. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
Yep.
You're fat adapted, and then you can utilize the carbohydrate, exogenous carbohydrate, in order to fuel the effort that you're doing.
Correct. And that is also probably another important point is like, and some of us in the fat cult, let's call it, we some of us go a little too far sometimes, and I put my hand up there as well, as been there in the past where we don't practice these carbohydrate amounts and needs. And I think when you're getting towards the pointy end of your race in terms of the training and you're doing your key sets that are going to prepare you for your race, it's a good idea to do these key sets in the fueled sort of status or situation, right? So imagine you're, T minus 1, 2, 3 weeks out from your event. You better be fueling those key weekend sessions that are just pieces of the Ironman you're going to do with some carbohydrate, just like you're going to get on that day, at least in some form, so that you're practicing kind of the fueling and how that feels, right? So that's an important aspect of metabolic flexibility. You're just checking everything. You just make, oh yeah, that feels right. Yeah, no, that's going to be good on the day. So there's no surprises.
We have another question, this time from Robert. What are some objective measures to utilize when profiling athletes to assess the type of stimulus they would best respond to when tailoring training plans? For
Yeah.
example, we have a novel ultra runner who is more of an anaerobic athlete, thinking type 3 or 4 heat targets.
Okay, we'll get to the hit targets there in a sec, but let's back the question up a bit. So, what Robert's probably taken our athlete profiling priming course because he's using those terms in there. So, just a little plug out, 100% free course. Go to athleteprofilingprimer.com. and put in your email, and you get a 5-day course to teach you the basics of profiling. And the long and the short of it is that we're all different profiles. We're all different in terms of our makeup, in terms of, are we more slow twitch? We can go long and strong for a long time, or are we more twitchy, like a cheetah? We can absolutely fly and run and sprint super fast, or are we somewhere kind of in the middle? Now, Robert's question, he's wondering about, hey, he's saying, I'm a bit of an odd ultra runner. I'm more of a cheetah. I'm more of a sprinty kind of twitchy guy. What does that mean for me in terms of my HIIT sessions that are going to complement what it is that I do in my training? And it's a great question. We have spoken, we've spoken before on the podcasts, Training Science podcast, about the different types and what that means. So when you're doing HIIT sessions, like long intervals, when you do long intervals, we're talking like VO2 max intervals, things like a 3-minute effort with 2 minutes recovery, repeat, at VO2 max. Those are really taxing on twitchy athletes, because they that fast twitch fiber that they use to gravitate on and do that high intensity work, it's not made of much mitochondria, versus the diesel engine athlete that's doing that 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off at VO2 max. That the fast twitch muscle fibers that they are using are more laden with mitochondria. They're more fatigue resistant, and they don't push out as much lactate. And we know that the more lactate that you push out when you burn carbohydrates with those big, powerful muscle fibers, the more that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight system, that causes for that stress. So this is how we're all different. So in Robert's case, if he's coaching or if he is an athlete that's got a good, real fast sprint, he wants to use short intervals, because if he uses shorter intervals, and we're talking like the 30-30, the classic 30-30 that you see, but he could also be doing like 20-40 as well, right? He needs that pause in between his sprinty efforts. When he takes that pause, short pause in between the sprinty efforts, we have this cool little molecule called myoglobin, which is the hemoglobin of your muscles, and it quickly resaturates the oxygen and it blunts the lactate response in those twitchy athletes. So if we switch things over, as coaches, think about this too, right? If you got a twitchy athlete, switch it over to do short intervals, and you're going to get a lot better response. We're not going to push out lactate as much. We're not going to stimulate that athlete's sympathetic nervous system as much. And they'll be able to continue on the next time with that consistent training. Remember, consistency in training is one of the key factors that's going to lead to performance success, or building your fitness profile. And the last part, Robert's getting fancy here, and you can see he's well read in HIIT science. Thank you, Robert. He's talking type 3 and type 4 targets. These are basically, anaerobic and anaerobic with a neuromuscular target. Thank you, Paul. Yes, saw the book there. Perfect.
Yep,
And
that's where it's from.
So yeah, so Robert is thinking right, but use the short interval, right? So those are the right targets, Robert, but use the short interval format or weapon to get at that target.
I think also important to consider how often he does the high intensity interval work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How long is a piece of string? It really depends on how conditioned you are to it. Probably also depends on your phenotype, what we just talked about. But, 5 days is kind of, a general good rule. You want to at least sort of have probably 5 days between them, especially, if you're giving kind of a solid effort. And as one example, Mariana runs her her short interval work as a group on Zwift, and she's doing that every week, every 7 days, right? So you can go more frequent, especially the more well trained you are. But as a general rule, you're usually pretty ready for another hit of some sort, pardon the pun, after about 5 days.
All right. Next question is from Adam Evans. Why do overtraining warnings appear on Athletica's training plan? One popped up on a session for next week, but now it's gone. What's the best way to deal with them? Shouldn't the program automatically adjust to not create overtraining?
Yeah, we get this one a lot, don't we, MJ?
All the time.
All the time, yeah. These are just guidelines. So, a couple things. We have dealt with this question again, but it's good that they're there because, and we've talked about just absolutely removing these. There is, I will say, if these are annoying you as an athlete on Athletica, just go to your settings in your profile, and there's just a little place in your profile settings, and you just click remove warnings from Athletica, and those will go away. All it's there for you is a little bit of a guideline to say, hey, this is looking back to your performance profile. And Andrea Zignoli spoke about the performance profile. He spoke about the Bannister model, fitness and fatigue, and how Athletica uses markers of that power, pace, and heart rate that you're recording and giving to Athletica. And it's sensing how much training load. Remember, training load is another word for training stress. So basically, it's saying that you're looking like you're getting quite a bit of stress in your workouts that have been before that, and we might there will be changes that were made that are being made. So just check on that. You should have these. You should see your workouts actually adapting. And if you look downstream of your sessions, you'll see a before and after. But sometimes it gets to the point where there's so much load training that's going on that Athletica kind of can't put too much less on that. So therefore, it sort of shows you this overtraining warning. But it's just a warning. It's just saying, hey, we see you're working pretty hard out there. Keep in mind you're pushing it. Just be mindful of it. You might want to grab a workout and move it downstream, delete a workout, especially if it feels right. Mostly you should be acting on these warnings when they align with your feeling. Are you sleeping bad? Do you really feel like you are actually overtraining? Because if you are, then you've got more than one indicator, right? HRV is another one. Is your HRV tanking, right? So all of these various different things, they're just indicators to say, let's have a think of the whole program and what would be a wise decision right now. And you make a great point, Adam, with respect to should Athletica actually move this. This is something that we're looking at in the future. It might be an option for people in the future, but Andrea spoke to this, and one of our key philosophies is that we really want to work alongside you as an athlete or you as a coach to give you this advice. And because we all, big philosophy is that the context rules over the content. You know more than we do. You know more than Athletica does. Um, as we spoke to just recently with Alan, there's a learning curve about that. We know but we're on this journey with you, and we know that you can learn what feels like good training. So stick with it; it's worth it, and these warnings are just there as your friend to keep you in line. Feel free to voice your comments on the forum. Get in touch with us. We're usually pretty helpful and fairly responsive when we get these emails and messages. So I think I answered some of those there. But any further, Mariana?
I also get them every once in a while. It's kind of a fine balance what you do with those, but they can be really helpful teaching you about the feel. I know, like, we've talked about the feel so many times, but it's maybe not very clear what it means if you've never thought of your body's and mind's response to hard training. And those overtraining warnings can help you, like, center and ground yourself, and like put all those pieces together: your sleep, your stress, your overall energy, and then make those adjustments. It's like if you think of Athletica as a GPS unit, and you just drive a little too far, you missed your turn. The overtraining warning is kind of like, hey, I think you just missed your turn. I'll reroute, right? Um, so if you see those, maybe it's time to, like, really center and ground yourself and ask, hey, if I go run now, will my legs just feel like two blocks of, wood? And how long do they feel like you're running through mud or whatever? So I think they can be really helpful. All right, we have one more question, and this is from Giorgio Paziolis. I think we've answered his question before. And in a previous podcast, I think it was episode 27, we talked about the benefits of training in the heat. He's asking how we can measure this, for example, with core sensor, and are these tools compatible with Athletica?
Not yet, Giorgio. So yeah, we're definitely keeping an eye on core. In core, to my knowledge, it's basically a skin sensor. It sits on your heart rate monitor, I believe. That's just touching your skin. And yeah, I get, it's one site to my knowledge. That's a and it's giving an indicator of what your core temperature might be based on that. And that's cool, but it's at the end of the day, it's not compatible yet, and we'll keep an eye on it. Again, I would encourage Giorgio to go back and listen to the podcast that we've done on heat, to listen to the podcasts that I've done with Chris Minson on heat adaptation on the Training Science podcast. It was another fantastic one. But ultimately, getting heat in your program is so beneficial, and you can get it in your program in so many different ways. But yeah, there's a lot of different adaptations that occur when we get hot. And I know, Mariana, you're a big convert as well, having recently used heat adaptation for your Ironman. And but the general principle is get hot in your workouts and outside of your workouts. If you're in a cold climate like I'm in, going so I'll doing a lot of saunas and whatnot, and I know it keeps my cardiovascular system running pretty smoothly. So the workouts actually feel a lot easier when I'm doing heat training all along those ones. So
It's hard. Like, there's really no, like, objective measures to say, hey, now I know that I'm heat adapted, but I just kept track of my running time. So in the beginning, it would be a lot slower than in a cooler weather running. And then after a while, and it would feel so horrible. I hated it. We've talked about it many times. So it's so hard. So there's two things that I kept track of: my overall feel when I was running in the heat, and how long I was, like, somewhat okay running. So first it was maybe half an hour, then it was 45 minutes, then it was like an hour. It was fine before I felt like dying. And then the second measure was my running speed. So on my aerobic runs, I would just keep track of my run pace. So first it was slow, and then it started to pick up, and eventually got to the same running pace as my cold weather.
yep. Yeah, perfect.
So
And then the other thing you can look at as well is your heart rate, of course. So,
yeah.
you're looking at your efficiency, your aerobic decoupling. So all of these ones should be improving as well. So you should be running at the same or lower heart rate as in the cool prior, and that should just start to plateau the more heat adapted that you get. And that's because of all these various different changes that are occurring in your body, where your cardiovascular efficiency ultimately is improving, and your plasma volume is expanding. The sodium kinetics of your body are improving, and all these various different things that we've spoken about previously. But it's super beneficial to get in you, and a lot does come down to feel. And putting it super simple, you should feel a whole lot better in the heat after heat training than you did when you started doing it.
Simple enough. But there are so many devices that are coming out that are still truly in their infancy, with continuous glucose monitors and lactate monitors and core temperature monitors, and they're just not there yet in my eyes. And they're getting closer. They're getting more usable, but not fully yet.
Yeah, and this probably, in my mind, this is really where the help of a coach that uses a program like Athletica, so someone like Paul and Mariana, is super beneficial, because they, people like that are experienced at it, and they can walk you through that, developing that feel. And it's really, I just encourage any listeners there that are wondering about this to reach out to the two of you to use your services to help you.
Thank you. Well, that is all for this week. We had 4 solid, interesting questions. Join us next week on the Athletes Compass podcast. Again, ask these training questions, on our Facebook, in the comments, in the forum, on our social media. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to give us a follow and a 5-star review. For more information or to schedule a consultation with Paul, Mariana, or myself, check the links in the show notes. For Mariana Rakai, Dr. Paul Larson, I'm Paul Worlowski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. We appreciate your comments and training questions and your 5-star reviews. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform Athletica.ai. Thanks for listening.